Look, we have now 3 teachers on this episode. And 4, Ben, I think counts in some ways. And this very clearly to me is a movie about the pitfalls of becoming a teacher.
Wait, what? What did you just say?
No.
Yeah, it is. Could be.
This is about societal oppression.
This ain't don't be a teacher.
Limited gender roles. Competition amongst women.
And being a teacher. No, just kidding.
I don't know if it's going to make the cut.
Yeah, maybe not. I'm Wilson Lai.
I'm Benjamin Yap.
I'm Eli Sands.
And I'm Lisa Dombrowski.
And you're listening to Deep Cut.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss that director's life and career to bring in context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to. If you're enjoying Deep Cut, please rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to help others discover the show. Better still, leave a review on Apple Podcasts or comment directly on episodes on Spotify. You can also find us at deepcutpod.com to find links to our socials, our Discord, and our Patreon. Welcome to a really special episode of Deep Cut today. Something of an origin story for us 3 with our special guest here today, Professor Lisa Dombrowski. Professor Lisa Dombrowski is the Film Studies and East Asian Studies professor at Wesleyan University and is the author of the book, The Films of Samuel Fuller, If You Die, I'll Kill You, which was released in 2008, and the editor of Kazan Revisited. She's also the co-editor with Justin Wyatt of ReFocus, The Later Works and Legacy of Robert Altman, which came out in 2022.
Hey, I worked on that book. Welcome to the podcast, Lisa.
You did indeed. You have a thank you.
You should receive a copy in the mail.
It's like $100 book.
It's best to get the digital version.
Yeah.
Go to a local library near you.
We definitely don't have this. In Singapore.
Well, then you can request it from the library and they can buy it.
Yeah, I should do that. I don't know if they care. We'll find out.
We'll go in together on a copy and mail it to each other, like the Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants.
Yeah.
I can send you a copy.
Oh.
Thank you.
But Lisa is currently researching and developing a digital humanities project on Chinatown movie theaters in North America, as well as learning Cantonese on her own. And she's currently teaching a class for the East Asian Studies on contemporary East Asian cinema, which is a class that I took and really loved, and is also teaching a class on international art cinema, which I haven't taken and would very much like to be back in your classroom.
It sounds like global film auteurs.
And I've been teaching Hong Kong cinema for a couple of years now as well. And that brings us to our film for today.
Perfect segue. And today we are going to be talking about Celine Tang Shu-shen's 1968 feature debut, The Arch. But before we get into all this information about The Arch and talking about the movie, I'd just like to say big thank you to Professor Dombrowski because she was the one that basically brought all 3 of us together. I remember it was because of your Global Film Auteurs class and bonding over late nights finishing essays.
Is the 3 of us in the Shapiro Writing Center pulling an all-nighter to write your essay? Because we do not do anything on time. Oh, we're on time, but very, very late.
That may have been the night that our group chat was born, in which for a long time, our nicknames in the group chat were the directors that we were writing about for Global Film Auteurs.
Yeah.
Ooh, so what were those directors?
I was Mira Nair. Shout out Zoran Mamdani. Very big shout out to Zoran Mamdani.
I just learned that literally this afternoon.
Really?
It blows my mind. Yes.
And Ben chose the first episode of our podcast, the director of our first episode of the podcast, Koreeda. And I chose someone that has a link to today's discussion. I chose Anne Hui.
Yes. Nice. Yeah. Nice. What a spread.
Yeah, it's a good spread.
It is the germ of the podcast.
Yeah.
Well, this is the reason that I'm so excited to be talking with you all today, because it's been a number of years since we've all been in the same space together talking about movies. And though we're spread all over the world now, we're in a wonderful virtual space together. So I'm very excited about that.
And it's been a long time since we've sat in a lecture of yours, and I've really missed the way that you think and talk about movies. I feel like I learned so many strategies through the different classes I took with you, through melodrama and the women's picture, global film auteurs, and East Asian cinema. I feel like I took a lot of what I put into doing this podcast today from you and the way that you taught us how to watch movies, basically. So a big thank you to you.
Oh, well, and I think actually, as you rattle off those classes, there are things that we discuss together in all of them that we can bring to bear to this discussion today, thinking about authorship, thinking about who's involved in a canon and why, formal strategies that help authors tell stories in cinema, and also melodrama.
We talk about it all the time on this podcast. Actually, we bring up melodrama a lot. Yeah. We're always like, this movie is a melodrama when it doesn't seem
everywhere.
Like one. Every single time.
Okay, before we get any deeper into this film, let me introduce it. And I'm going to introduce it by saying that this episode is also going to be a partnership with the M+ Museum in Hong Kong. It's really sweet that with the Hong series that we're doing earlier this year with the Asian Film Archive and M+, that I don't know, we're getting popular. we're getting brand deals, guys. That's what's happening.
Also, I'm realizing this M+ thing is initiative with Chanel. So we kind of have a relationship with Chanel. Kind of.
Maybe.
I won't ask for a hand.
I will. That sounds great.
I will.
Chanel bag with our faces on it.
Yeah, that would be incredible. But The Arch is playing as part of the M+ Restored program this fall. So the M+ Restored is a 3-year initiative by M+ and Chanel, which was launched in July 2023 to increase the visibility of Hong Kong's cinematic heritage. It focuses on presenting and restoring 9 feature-length films from the Hong Kong New Wave cinema post-1979. I don't know why it says this, because this movie is not post-1979. But okay. Highlighting its experimental and innovative nature, influential figures. So another big film that's coming out from the M+ Restored program is Patrick Tam's Love Massacre, which I absolutely adore and has the worst rip online of all time. So I'm like, this is a necessity, as well as
it's like a white whale for many people.
It is
I'm really excited to hear that, because I've specifically waited to watch it in the hopes that they would restore it, knowing that you love it, Wilson.
Yeah, well, it's happening, Eli.
Great.
It's happening. Yeah. So through archival research and film analysis, M+ Restores aims to reevaluate the new wave's impact on Hong Kong's film industry and its lasting cinematic legacy. I guess you could sort of treat The Arch as a precursor to the new wave. So that's how this can fit in. But The Arch was restored in 2025. It premiered at Cannes Classics at this year's 78th Cannes Film Festival this year, and will play at the M+ Theater next month, which is October, and they'll be the first of the 9 features that will be released as part of this M+ Restored. So a big thank you to the M+ folks over there for handing us a screener so we could see what this restoration looks like and having us talk about it on the podcast today. And a very, very interesting director that we're talking about. So this is Tong Su-sun, Tang Shu-shuen, Celine Tang, born in 1941 in Yunnan province, but moved to Hong Kong and was in the US studying film in college, sort of something like I was doing. She studied film at University of Southern California after secondary school in Hong Kong. And she stayed in the US after graduation and worked on some commercials over there and returned to Hong Kong in the late 1960s to make her feature debut, which is the film we're talking about today, The Arch. And she basically made this film without any production help. She knew no one in the industry. So she was basically able to self-finance this and just captain this film ship to completion, bringing collaborators from all over the world. We can talk about that more later on. But yeah, so The Arch, it's 1600s in southwest China, and the quiet quotidian life in a small village is interrupted by the arrival of a platoon of soldiers. Madame Tong Daishao is a middle-aged widowed teacher living with her mother, old Madame Dong, and her daughter, Wei Ling, when the military captain Yang is quartered in their home. Madame Tong clearly thinks this captain is a cute guy, but so does her daughter. To make matters more complicated, Madame Tong is about to be honored in the village with the construction of the titular arch. It's a classic melodrama setup. Will she follow her heart or uphold her virtuous standing in the village by condoning a marriage between Yang and Wei Ling? Okay, that's a lot of me talking. And I want to ask our special guest today, what's your relationship with this film? I know you teach this in your Hong Kong cinema class, so I was wondering why you choose this to teach and what about it strikes you?
Well, one way that the film is frequently positioned, as we see from the description from M+ that you highlighted previously, which is a film that's a precursor to the Hong Kong New Wave. Like many members of the New Wave, Tong studied abroad, came back to Hong Kong. Many of those folks also, unlike her, also worked in television in Hong Kong, specifically through TVB, and then started their careers making films that were focusing on social issues. However, this film in many ways is quite distinct because of its overt formal experimentation. In some Hong Kong New Wave films, but it's not necessarily a consistent marker of all of the films, period. And all of those folks were working within the commercial film industry. So I think another thing that's quite interesting about this film is how completely outside of standard Hong Kong production structures it was created. And in that, I see it as part of a continuum going back actually to the United States and the early days of Chinese American cinema, where we had a young woman named Marion E. Wong, who in 1917 created the first Chinese American feature film. And she did that, again, completely outside of existing industrial structures. Wong was relying heavily on her family, who were working with her both in front of and behind the camera and helping to finance the film. And it's thanks to their family that we still have a remnant of the film that survived. For Tong, she was really drawing on many of the connections that she made in the U.S. while she was in school. She was able to find financing in the U.S., some connections to some of her collaborators, again, behind the camera, and ended up creating a very transnational production, which was drawing on formal strategies that were not necessarily normative in Hong Kong at the time, really drawing particularly from European art cinema. So it's not a type of film that we typically think of when we think of Hong Kong cinema. And yet it had such an incredible legacy, both critically at the time that it came out, but also as an influence for filmmakers coming up in later traditions who wanted to blend a little bit of the art cinema tradition with the commercial filmmaking of Hong Kong.
That strategy of transnational cinema is something that you see a lot of in Southeast Asia now. A lot of Southeast Asian films are courting European or American money to make their films, usually European, because Europe is looking for that art cinema from corners of the world to amp up their programs and like maybe a little bit exoticizing their programs to be like, oh, here's the first film from Bhutan. Here's the first film from this. And so a lot of cinema from this region is getting money from France especially and like a few other countries to make those films. And a lot of them do kind of fit within this formal art house strategy to make films that try to push the envelope in terms of what the form is trying to do, whether it's through slow cinema or formal overt choices.
And I think in that way, we can also connect it to one of the trends in contemporary Hong Kong cinema, which is what you're describing, young filmmakers who are working with a more international art house style, who are trying really to focus in on social issues in contemporary Hong Kong, hoping to generate attention on the festival circuit, which was something that Tang was able to do quite successfully with this film.
Do you know, was that her intention going into the production to aim for festival screenings and distribution abroad primarily?
It's a really interesting question. She's done quite a few interviews, and I've never heard her speak specifically about the audience that she was thinking of for the film. But she definitely was very cognizant of wanting to utilize formal strategies that were not rooted in conventional production practices in Hong Kong at the time. And that ended up being a bit of a challenge during the part when they were shooting in Hong Kong, which is when they were shooting the interiors, that some of the Hong Kong crew members that they had were, shall we say, less than supportive of the production practices and the visual strategies. Once they moved to Taiwan for the exteriors, they had a much more harmonious circumstances on set. But it's true that the film did debut abroad, played in Cannes, played in Locarno, played in the San Francisco Film Festival, and had a very limited release in Hong Kong. Part of the issue was that it was a black and white film, which at that point in time was associated with low budget, quickly made Cantonese films, which were not viewed as quality films. This film is very much a quality film, right? But it's working outside of the expectations that would have been normative for the time for what connoted a quality film, which we can think of big budgets, color, widescreen, lavish mise-en-scène when we're thinking about historical films, right? So we think about classic Shaw Brothers pictures from this period.
I think before we start talking about specific things about the film, let's talk about our general reactions watching this film for the first time, or our rewatch for you probably, Lisa. Maybe I'll go first. So I was first introduced to Celine Tang's The Arch earlier this year. So Tilda Swinton was actually in town, and she was here for a talk that was promoting this restoration program. And I obviously just wanted to go see Tilda Swinton. And that was like my main aim. And then I show up, and this event is basically her talking with Tang Shu-shuen and them talking about the making of this movie and why the restoration is like so awesome that's happening this year. So before having seen the film, I got a whole director Q&A about like different moments in the film, like why she decided to make it. And the clips that they showed at the screening were incredible. So I was already very like sold. I was like, oh, I'm going to be there to watch this when it comes out at M+. So this was already on my radar. So when Lisa, you brought the list of films that you wanted to talk about with us, I was like, wow, this is a great opportunity to watch The Arch. And it is incredibly powerful filmmaking, and I think Tang is making so many choices here that are really special. Like, I love the way that she uses freeze frames at the end of some scenes, and the way that she bridges scenes together, like the transitions between scenes, and like superimpositions and overlaying, like a lot of formal choices that she is making that is so out of the box. Like, I'm thinking about other Chinese films that I love that came out during that time, and it's a lot of like King Hu, Dragon Inn, or the Valiant ones, and it's like those are also very formally impressive, but not as daring at all as what Celine Tang is doing here in The Arch. So yeah, I'm really, really excited to talk about this film. And also, it's been a while since we've talked about an old film. Well, pre-1980s, probably. Pre-2000s as well, I think. It's been a while since we've talked about an old film on the podcast. Ben, how about you? What did you think about this movie?
What did I think of this movie? I think at the start of the movie, because the movie begins pretty slowly and kind of like placid. And I was like, oh no, is this like a springtime in a small town situation? Yeah, so I was like, oh no, because that was a movie that we were assigned in a class that Lisa was teaching that I was like, this is boring. And I do not want to write an essay about it. And so I was like, okay, I guess I need to figure out what to say about this movie. But then around the midway part, things start picking up formally. I'm like, wait a minute, something's going on here. Because I had no context about the legacy of the film and what it stood for within the history of film and like what it was trying to do in, I guess, opposition to what else other people are doing. So it was a big surprise when it starts doing intense cross-cutting, fading, and all these other formal choices that remind you of things that people are doing, like whether it's like French New Wave or like even like Eisenstein, like that kind of like smash cutting to create meaning, which is not something you really see even in cinema today, honestly. This is something that comes from this time of cinematic experimentation. I was like, whoa, what's happening here? That's when it like really perked up for me and like thinking about what this is really trying to say. And I guess think about it as a text for studying cinema is quite interesting because it is a good replacement as a source text to think about those kinds of devices that we might use, say, in Eisenstein or a French New Wave film. Because this, yes, it does come after, but like it uses those. So it's from this lineage. And of course, she goes to USC, but I think film influencers really like take their paths that they need to take to get to filmmakers. And sometimes it's quite a circuitous and like multi-step path that somehow this filmmaker is influenced by all of these things. So it's kind of interesting to see what she decides to use and the extent to which she uses it. Because there's like superimposition is, but it's like triple superimposition. It's not just double. And it's like, how far can we push this to tell this seemingly old story, like old Chinese like folktale story, but with new tools? So that's kind of interesting. I think that's why it kind of feels quite different from even a modern film or even a film from that time.
Yeah, Ben, I want to pick up the thread that you're sewing together.
Oh.
Metaphor.
It's an important metaphor for the film.
You're right. Yeah. I want to sit down at the loom that you've started assembling. I was really taken by this movie to the point where when she agrees to marry off Wei Ling to Captain Young, I slap my forehead and like, that's, you know, how I know I'm in. This movie's conversation with modernity feels really crucial to me. And Ben, I think that largely does come through in the formal techniques that it's using that put it into conversation with French Impressionist cinema, with montage, needless to say, with Subrata Mitra's involvement, the conversation with Satyajit Ray. All these things that it is doing feel like they're in service of saying this system of oppression that Madame Tang is under is not just a thing of the past. It is still a modern thing. It is both a very daring and exciting formal experiment, but it feels like Tang has really anchored it purposefully in what she wants to say about her social context. I'm really in the pocket with this one. I enjoyed it a lot.
Yeah, I think you all brought us some really interesting points. You know, first off, this is a story that is rooted in a folk tale that later then became a literary short story before it was adapted by Tang. And she made significant changes along the way, which are quite interesting that we can talk about. Often literature is highlighted as providing more access to subjectivity than cinema because it's easier and perhaps more natural to be able to have access to characters' thoughts and feelings. Tang had a central challenge in this film. Her main character, whose name is the Chinese name of the film, I think that's very important, right? The original name of the film is not The Arch, it's Madame Tang. And so right from the beginning, her character is centered in the narrative. However, she's a character who does not necessarily feel free to express her feelings from start to finish. So as a filmmaker, your challenge is, how do we get to the subjectivity of this character? And so Tang draws from, as you all have done an outstanding job of highlighting, a wide range of, if we can think of paints on the cinematic palette, right? Coming from all sorts of formal and industrial traditions. So that without even saying what she's feeling, we know through not just the visual palette, but also the score she is feeling, right? And we also want to highlight the importance of the performance of Lisa Liu here as well, who through her eyes, through her facial expressions and her gestures, where she is looking when she looks up, when she looks down, when she turns away, combining with all of these techniques that you highlighted before, we infer an extraordinary amount about what is going on within a woman who does not feel free to speak.
I was really taken by her performance. I don't think I'd seen her in anything before.
You have, but you probably don't know it. In The Last Emperor, in The Joyla Club, in Lust Caution, working for many, many, many decades, and is a seminal actress that I feel is under-recognized.
Yeah.
She just got a Hollywood star this year.
Oh, wow. Congrats.
Well earned, well deserved.
The oldest person to get it, if I'm not wrong.
98.
Wow.
Yes.
It's really interesting for me because I feel like a lot, like my big gripe with a lot of Chinese films of that era, or even like until the 90s, is they're like overdubbing that they do because they have to like release it in like Cantonese and Mandarin. And this was like obviously dubbed over, but because there was like such a lack of dialogue being spoken, like, and also I feel like from the subtitles that were burned into the copy that we watched, I think Tang was just like not really concerned that much with what exactly the dialogue was. There's like whole stretches of the film with small talk that are not subtitled in English, which I thought was like so crazy to me. I'm like, oh, I'm glad I understand Mandarin, but like I just don't think it really matters too much to Tang. But I feel like if M+ people are listening to this, I hope you fix it before October, because I feel like people will be complaining, even though it's like it's maybe a formal choice. I'm like, people will be complaining if they don't understand what's being said. Maybe I'm not sure.
I will say that I got the point. Like these two messaged me before I watched and were like, oh my God, Eli, you're screwed. Like, sorry.
I didn't say, no one said that. We just said it was a light subtitling job. Light.
Relaxed subtitling.
Well, it's literally light, like visually light. It's quite faint on the image. I actually think that's more of an issue than what is not being subtitled, which, as Wilson notes, is primarily small talk or personal addresses.
I did comment, like, it felt like I was watching a silent film in that sense because it operates like an intertitle, right? An intertitle doesn't translate the entire line, and the response might be a gesture plus words, but the words are not intertitled because that would just waste time. So here it's like the key information is told to you by subtitle, and then a lot of stuff is just left out because it's not important to the main plot. But you get what people are trying to communicate, whether through gesture or look. And you get the gist of it just from those relaxed subtitles.
And oh, the looks in this movie.
Absolutely. And, one scholar really focused her analysis of this film on the female gaze in particular, right? We've talked about our primary character, but as Wilson noted in the beginning, we actually have 3 generations of women within this film who all play very important roles in shaping the plot. But particularly the unspoken tension between our mother, Madame Deng, and her daughter, where the generational difference in the understanding of the feminine role starts to unroll what becomes the tragedy for our central character within the film.
Yeah. Top 10 melodramatic situation right there.
I need to explain my Letterboxd review now.
Go, Ben.
Because they didn't understand my review, which is oyako-don pantheon, which I'll explain right now. Oyako-don is a Japanese rice dish in which you have an egg and chicken on top of rice.
Oh no.
But the kanji or Chinese characters for it are mother and child.
Oh my God.
And then you have them together.
I thought you put it there because she killed the chicken.
No, so actually when I thought of that, I was like, oh, this is actually part of the text of the film. It's about chicken and eggs. And so a oyako-don is like the man who has the mother and child together as a meal. Anyway.
Yeah.
And I feel like there must be so many other films that fulfill this pantheon. So now I'm on the search for this.
On the topic of this situation of mother versus daughter and the tensions therein, I think it's a real mark of strength that Tang chooses to give us similar sets of subjective access to both Wei-ling, that they both have stretches of time where they control the range of narration, and the style gives us depth into their emotional experience and different sets of motifs within what is being shown in the natural world.
Should we talk about scenes?
Yeah, well, so from the beginning, we can start with the beginning of the film. It has such a classic opening. Our opening and closing, we start with nature, right? We start with the mountains and the sky, and we zoom gradually through a series of dissolves into our central village. And then the outsiders arrive, dun, 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 right? Our soldiers come in. And so right from the beginning, we have our characters set within the world of nature, which is going to become a recurring visual motif within the film. But we also start to have a contrast created between the domestic space and the exterior, more active-oriented space of nature. Because as our soldiers are coming in, who's waiting for them but our 3 generations of women within the family compound, right? A compound which, with the exception of an older male servant, is devoid of male presence, because the son of Nai Nai, right, who's the mother-in-law of Madame Tang, has died. So she is a widow and her daughter is fatherless. And as this new man arrives, it might be one of the few men that young Wei-ling has ever met of a social class that she might interact with as a potential equal or marriage partner. So the tension and the excitement is palpable. But it's fascinating that in conversation, she asks her grandmother, is he like my father was? Because that's the only point of reference, right? So at the same time, our new captain who arrives is both a father figure and a potential lover. But she's also looking to leave the compound, right? She talks about, if I were a man, I could ride out with them. So she's thinking about where could I go? You know, it's like the British romantic novels where the best a middle-class young woman can hope for is to marry a guy in the Navy so he can get on a ship and leave. You know, she's looking for the wider world and for more experience. But it's a horizon that is cut off for her mother because of her mother's status as a widow and the status within the village that she needs to maintain as a woman of virtue and a woman of service, right? Not one defined by the possibility of desire, which her daughter has. I'm getting ahead of myself. So at the beginning, we have Wei-ling looking out. She's looking through the door. She's looking through the window. She's always looking. And who comes through the door but the captain?
My favorite way that Tang establishes the status quo between the 3 generations of women is how she uses deep staging in those early sections. That moment when she's asking her grandmother about her father in comparison to Captain Young, she's in the foreground working with some ingredients, and the grandmother's in the background. They wind up in their conversation swapping places. So grandma's in the foreground, Wei-ling is in the background. And then as they start to talk about Madame Tang and her getting the arch and being honored, there's another sort of cut in, and then Madame Tang comes into the background and then joins her daughter in the foreground of this new shot. So that interchangeability kind of speaks to those blurred boundaries and the multiple roles that people are occupying to each other in this household, the confusion about what is the difference between mother and sister or father and potential husband. It's fertile ground for that confusion, which comes pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're really being keyed in very early on. Even like, although the action or like the melodramatic action of the film happens much later, I feel like you're already understanding the triangle that is being shaded out for us just through staging and camera placements and being with someone's subjectivity or being outside of someone's subjectivity. I think there's like a lot of bold choices that are made in the opening that indicate to us this. I was wondering, Lisa, if you could tell me a little bit more about Tang Shu-shen's relationship with Subrata Mitra, who is Satyajit Ray's cinematographer, because I was really fascinated by reading the credits beforehand. I was like, oh, what's this name? And then I Google it and I'm like, wait, he shot some of my favorite movies of all time. Like, how did I not know this? And this was the only film that he made in East Asia as well. So that's wild.
Ah. So the connection was through James Ivory, who also had Mitra shoot one of his films. Because remember, we think of James Ivory, despite the fact that he was an American, as a British filmmaker, because the big name films were all from the UK in the 80s and 90s. But he started shooting in India in the 1960s. And so Mitra was his DP there. Tang met James Ivory when she was studying in the United States. So that was one important connection. Another important connection she made when she was in Southern California was with the editor of the film, Les Blank. So Les Blank is most well known as a documentary filmmaker of pictures like Werner Herzog Eats a Shoe, right? Yes. Who has a kind of comic sensibility in many of his documentaries that's completely absent in this film. But Tang credits Blank with thinking of the freeze frame, which is one of those formal strategies that you all cited as being particularly impactful and I think is very important to give us moments of pause that allow us to think of what the characters might be thinking of in that moment. And it's almost entirely utilized just for Madame Tang within the film. So with Mitra, Tang storyboarded the film before they got to Hong Kong and started working at Cathay shooting the interiors. And it was that difference in how to light a set that Mitra was used to, how to plan the way that we are going to choreograph a scene that was such a struggle for so many of the Hong Kong technicians who saw this as a black and white film and therefore a film that you were going to shoot quickly and just get over with. And they were utilizing techniques and strategies that were unfamiliar to local film workers, which is what created a fair amount of tension. But it's quite interesting to look at the scene structure because you see, as Eli described, an attempt to create different kinds of compositions through techniques other than conventional analytical editing. So with the use of the zoom, here often quite slow. The zoom was very much in vogue during this period in Hong Kong cinema, but tends to be associated with martial arts filmmaking, right? But here, utilizing it to change the framing within individual compositions, along with a moving camera and changes in blocking, Tang is able to create a range of shifting character relations across the exact same shot frequently. Then when you have these moments of fixity with the freeze frames, or in more intense moments, the superimpositions, without doing a conventional point of view editing to give us direct access to character subjectivity, we nevertheless are cued into what they're thinking and feeling. So it's really quite an original approach to the visual aesthetic of the film, particularly in relation to character subjectivity.
I think it's like thinking about it as part of a classic story, and then these subjective formal choices feel original within the context of the story that we're getting, which kind of is what I felt watching the film. Like I thought I was getting something at the start, the first half. I thought this was going to be like a slow Chinese movie about Confucian stress. But then it like uses all these things to get me into the headspace of Madame Tang, to understand how she's there, what kind of stress we're talking about without using dialogue necessarily. Even the situation is quite a simple situation in that sense. But in that simple situation, how far can I push and like solve this challenge of letting you know what's in her head without voiceover, especially, to understand what's in her head. Like on our podcast, we talk a lot about voiceover when it crops up in films as, for me personally, sometimes a bit of a crutch to do subjectivity. And I think this is one example of like how you can use visual and sonic choices to get to subjectivity rather than through voiceover alone. And this one does not use voiceover at all. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that should be true.
It does.
There are sonic flashbacks to poetry, which we need to talk about, but not necessarily right now. But yeah, I mean, Ben highlights this is the simple story, right? So we talked about outsiders come in, highlights the soldiers arrive, they need a place to stay. Madame Tang is a teacher. She has a classroom. It's an empty space. Knock on the door. Can we billet the soldiers in the classroom, right? But because the male servant of the household is out, we immediately have a gender-based dilemma. There's no men in the household. This isn't proper, right? And so we have an exchange between Madame Tang and her mother-in-law to try and figure out, how do we navigate this, right? These are esteemed guests, and yet we might be crossing a moral line here, welcoming them into our house. How are we going to manage that? And they eventually, because he's accompanied with a monk, and they know that the male servant is returning, they're like, okay, we'll put him in that other wing of the classroom, and we'll be sure to lock the door and it'll be fine. Female virtue maintained, still able to welcome the guests. But then we have proximity, right? And so proximity means, the opportunity for desire to emerge. And that emerges then on multiple levels. And that's what kicks off then the plot in such an interesting way. But already at the very beginning, we have this very simple plot where through the curiosity of the daughter, a new man, and then the curiosity of our visiting captain, this woman is educated. Look at all of these books. Poetry, right? Remember, he's not just a warrior. He's also a scholar.
Oh my God.
He can write poetry, right? This is
classic
the ideal.
Confucian ideal, warrior scholar.
Exactly. So it's like, And what's so interesting early on through that deep space staging that Eli was talking about is that we see through this wonderfully staged multi-planar shot where the captain is playing Go with Wei Ling. In the rear ground, right, Grandma's in the midground, and in the foreground is Madame Tang. And even though the captain's attention is supposed to be on the match, he's looking the whole time at Madame Tang because he's seen her books.
He's like center frame in that moment, right? So like your eye is directed towards him and where his eye line is as well.
Right. And since she's in the foreground, she's taking up the largest amount of mass within the frame. She's facing us as well. So her back is to him. She's not courting his attention at all. That's super important. But then Wei Ling, she is the aggressor in all of this. She chases the captain continually. She takes him to the plums.
I want to talk about the plum scene. Should we talk about this forest scene?
We have to talk about
because I think this was the moment I was like, wait, what's happening? Like, this was I was like, what? What's going on? I think the first is like the exiting of the interior space into an exterior space, right? So a change of environment. Then the lighting is like beautiful in a very like Patha Panchali kind of way, right? You got like light streaming through the forest leaves and stuff like that. I was like, okay, this is kind of like different. Something's going on here. And then I think when it starts doing a bit of this cross-cutting as they're picking the plums, and like it's also when the plot really kicks into gear where we see Wei Ling's desire come to fruition, pun intended maybe. Like where she more aggressively pursues him, like flirting with him and all that. And so I'm trying to remember the moment, and I think it's when because I was looking at your notes, Lisa, and like the ending of that scene is so interesting when it has that freeze frame of a close-up of the plum. And then it then fades, but does not completely dissolve, and then becomes a superimposition of this centered plum with the two of them on horseback walking in the center within the plum for a while. And it's kind of like a togetherness that they're supposed to feel. And like if you look at the way that the scene goes, they're picking the plums and there's like a casual banter and like flirtation. And at this point, I was a bit confused by Yang, the general, because he seemed more interested in the mother. And then he kind of treats her like a child and is like, oh, like you're like very immature and stuff. But then I think she's using like her feminine wilds to kind of like get him. And so the scene is of them plucking the plums and eating the plums. And it is like single shots on each of them. A few kind of interesting reframes on Wei Ling, because it kind of cuts to a second shot of her, but still single shots. But then this intercutting ramps up in speed and then becomes a two shot of the two of them plucking plums together. And then we go to that freeze frame that I talked about of the close-up of the plum, which is zoomed in on as well. So a lot of things going on in the way that the scene ramps up and then ends. And then after we get that wide shot of them walking, like them tossing the plums on the ground and like rolling down the hill. And I was like, oh, okay, why can't they bring him back to the house? I didn't understand that. Like, what's happening here? It's like forbidden fruit. I don't know.
The natural space cannot enter the domestic space. It's the space that signifies their desire that's growing.
So she's not supposed to be off alone with him.
Of course.
Fundamentally, right? So I want to go back to how Ben was describing the visuals of the scene, and particularly the mise-en-scène, right? The natural world in this film is presented as a world of sensual beauty. Particularly the use of the water in the stream is a recurring motif. We have a couple of washing scenes, right? Servants washing clothes in the stream. And we start with Wei Ling hanging out with the servants washing the clothes because this is her life. And she steals away. And she steals away to find the captain because she knows he's nearby with his troops. And when she steals off, the captain arrives and he says, "Why did you want me to come?" So we learn that what we haven't seen is that she sent this message to him, that she needed him in some way. So he's there on a false pretense, but she has a plan. So he thinks, okay, I'm going to escort her up to the top of the mountain so she can see a pretty scene, and then we're going to go, and that's going to be that. But that's not her plan. So they get up to the top, they see the pretty scene. He says, I need to go check on my soldiers. You stay here, don't move. And what does she do? She moves. And she starts to have fun. She's a young girl. She's impetuous. She's impertinent. She's playful. So let's have him chase me. So she gets him. He comes back. She's not there. He searches for her. He finds her. She runs. He comes after her, and she finds the plums. What is it about plums? We can go off into some rather blue conversation here.
We also just recorded an episode about Call Me By Your Name.
So we know about these fruits. And Ben made a really important point when he was talking about how that sequence, once they start plucking the fruit, is organized. It's in a very conventional way. We start with singles. Our emphasis is on them as individuals, and then we have the two shot. And so they start being paralleled as individuals, and then they're united within the frame, right? And as that's happening, they're eating the fruit. And by the end of it, as Ben so brilliantly described, we have these multiple, very overt formal strategies that are highlighting them as a unified couple, which we hadn't seen before. But as they're writing back, the captain says, we can't bring the plums with us. The plums are evidence of what has happened. So part of that might be trying to maintain propriety, but part of that might be him feeling a little guilty. Because as Ben noted, up to this point, he was trading poetry with Madame Tang. he knows on two levels that what he's doing is a betrayal. It's a betrayal of norms of propriety, but it's also a betrayal of Madame Tang.
And I think of his own desires too, because when he's taking Wei Ling up the mountain, we hear that voiceover of the poetry.
He's thinking of the poetry. Yes, he's thinking of the poetry he's written for Madame Tang. So we know he doesn't want to be there.
What's really interesting to me thinking about, this whole oyako-don situation is that because we're talking about this Confucian thing, right, which is like trying to elevate intellectualism as like a prime thing that is something worthy to search for, to desire for, which is like this poetry and whatever. And I wrote my first note after oyako-don on my notebook, which you can see here, was I'm thinking of my men, which is this quote that he says after he meets her. And then when I saw him say that, the performance to me was like, I don't think he needs to see his men. I think this is an excuse to go see his men, to give a sense of propriety to this meeting. It's like, I'm on the way to see my men and I meet Wei Ling on the way. I'm not here to meet Wei Ling. And so for him, although we don't get as much subjective access, the choice is between the young, impetuous woman who like maybe feeds a base desire versus the intellectual, older woman that is more of a match for him as a Confucian man. So he is kind of picking between the hot young woman and like the intelligent older one. And like, which one is the so-called right choice, which does get sealed for him when he's offered the younger woman, which gives the propriety that it needs for him to do that.
It's interesting, Ben, you say we don't get a ton of access to him, and you're right, we don't. Lisa, earlier you mentioned that we don't get a ton of traditional glance object editing. I think the one instance of it I clocked is from his eyes.
We see him looking at Madame Tang a lot.
But then I think we do get at one point an actual cut into his direct optical POV.
But him making that decision to marry her is sort of like communicated to us off screen. And like it doesn't really like happen within the narrative range of the film, which is interesting, but like so obvious because this is a film very much centered within the women and Madame Tang specifically, that there isn't a need to show that. There's just a need to see like the fallout from Madame Tang, which is what we get a lot of.
I think this narrative range choice that you just highlighted, Wilson, is really interesting because it means we don't actually know if the general likes this choice. It is the right choice for him, maybe from a societal level, because it is a partnership that is approved of. But we don't know if he is with the woman that he actually wants to be with necessarily.
He doesn't look happy at the wedding.
Nope.
Yeah, he doesn't.
My money's on no.
Which is like interesting. Yeah, I don't know. And then he essentially disappears from the film after the wedding. He's gone.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because it's not about him anymore. So this is an interesting point to maybe talk a little bit about the source material and what Tang is trying to do with this film. So it starts as a folktale. And in the original story, there is no captain. There are no soldiers. You have a widow who's seduced by a servant the evening before she's going to receive, in the story, a tablet of chastity. But because of the seduction, she's proven unworthy. And that leads her to kill herself. So that's version 1, a tragedy. Version 2 is reworked by Lin Yutang in his collection of short stories on Chinese legends. And there it becomes a comedy. Very interesting. So you have a captain, this is where he enters the story, seeks shelter in a house with multiple generations of widows and a teenage daughter. He falls in love with the daughter and marries her. After the marriage, the widow seduces the servant, even though she knows she'd have to give up the tablet of chastity. But then the son-in-law suggests, why don't you all get married? And everything ends up with a sort of happy but ironic note. So this is a really different version, right? We have that desire of old Chang, the servant, for her.
I was going to ask about that. I was like, why?
Right. It comes in Act 3 after the captain has left the story, but it has nothing to do with Madame Tang. She has no interest in him. So now it's really about her and the captain and their mutual attraction. So you have a similar plot, but with different variations and very different effects.
What's kind of coming to mind for me is like to kind of put this film in a very long lineage of the type of story it is. This reminds me of a lot of the films coming out today about older women in romantic plots. Like I'm thinking Baby Girl, The Idea of You. These films are really coming up now because people are really interested in this tension between not really proper proper old women the way that this is about, but like about this duty as like a CEO or whatever versus my desire for a man. So this kind of story has existed a very long time, and it still is like kind of a story that people want today. And it's kind of interesting to see that line and to maybe give a lot of our American viewers some context to the kind of story this is, because I think it helps you understand where this sits in a very large film canon.
I mean, I feel like it does fit, but also like the context is so different. Like I don't think that Madame Tang like has that desire to be like a great teacher. Like I don't think that is like the main thing. Like I think she is making sacrifices for the maintaining the well-being of her family. Like that's what's happening at the end, right? That's why she doesn't tell Wei Ling that the older Madame Tang has passed, right? In Mandarin Chinese, you say this term called 吃苦, which means to like eat bitterness. It's just to like endure hardships in order to just like survive or continue going. And I think that this is a very like prime example of eating bitterness as a character.
It's interesting that the character who's positioned against that worldview or way of life is the daughter. And she also has the most explicit line of dialogue as to what any character is feeling at a particular moment when her mother is interrogating her about her relationship with Captain Young. And she says, I'm not going to live like you. I'm not going to die alone like a widow. And that's the thing that finally gets her mom, that explicit line of dialogue finally gets her mom to say, all right, I'll marry you off.
Yeah, right. So I think that's so important, Ty. Like, how do we get to the point where this marriage takes place? And that elision, which is so fascinating, occurs within the plot of the moment where Madame Tang goes to the captain and they have some sort of conversation. We're left to completely imagine what must be the most heartbreaking moment for both of these characters in this story. A recognition that what they most desire will never happen, right? And the reason that it won't happen is because of societal norms, essentially. The mother's role is to sacrifice on behalf of her family. And at this point, her family is primarily her daughter and her mother-in-law, right? So for the sake of her daughter's happiness and for the sake of maintaining the status of the family, which at this point with her husband gone, Madame Tang talks about how hard her mother-in-law has worked to maintain the family in a essentially patrician status, right? In an elevated status within the village. Madame Tang has to work to do that. She still has to teach. We see her spinning yarn. Once the silver comes with the arch, the grandma says, you don't have to do that anymore. So in many ways, Madame Tang she's trying to fulfill a duty, right? And I think this is what Ben was talking about, is this pull between duty and desire. And the captain, on his part, is also somewhat limited, right? Because he still has his respect for Madame Tang and for the recognition she has within her village is so elevated that he doesn't want her to sacrifice what she has worked so hard for either. In a strange way, his love for her causes him to do the thing that will emotionally harm both of their love for each other, right? Causes them to do the thing that will emotionally harm them both the most, right? And that's what gives us our classic what if. from the world of melodrama, right? What if those sacrifices weren't necessary? And that takes us back to our critique of Confucianism and the social norms of the era.
I also just love that the moment when Wei Ling's way of life beats that Confucianist approach and she gets what she wants is through dialogue, which is against the expressive grammar of the rest of the movie. Whereas there's all this stuff going on in the edit and cinematography, it's dialogue that cuts through that, even if we don't get to hear exactly what is said between Yang and Madame Tang at that point.
Well, and so cutting through social norms also. A woman saying, this is what I want, and going after it. The decision to marry her off is precipitated by the second adventure in the outdoors, when again, Wei Ling was supposed to just be doing the wash, and she absconds, finds the captain, and we see them riding on horseback through a stream. Again, the water being used as a very sensual visual motif, intercut with the two of them. And this time they're laughing, right? There's a shared sense of joy in that moment that really helps to solidify the idea that there is something between these two, even if it might be momentary or of a different kind or depth of the relationship that the captain has with Madame Tang. But everybody has seen it. The villagers know that Wei Ling is in at the stream, and people are talking, right? So it's that social pressure that precipitates the marriage.
I think it's like the relationship is tactile rather than intellectual, which is what is the relationship between the general and Madame Tang. It is interesting because we talk a lot about the subjectivity that we get into Madame Tang, but then we're talking less about what the filmic form is doing to sell you the tactility of his relationship with the younger woman. So it's kind of using different strategies to explain the attraction to both sides, or like the kinds of relationships that we're getting with both kinds of women, because the strategies are slightly different.
Yeah.
And you can think about like the approach to basically the only tactile moment that Madame Tang and Captain Yang have is when they're catching that grasshopper, right? And it's such a brilliant scene, which sort of has the soundtrack supporting the movements that these characters are making. And the fact that we keep on flashing back to that specific insert of their hands closing on each other over the grasshopper hopper. Yeah, it is a grasshopper, right?
Cricket,
cricket. Yes, cricket.
It's hard to tell in black and white.
Bug. Makes it so important for her. Like it just keeps on replaying in her mind this one moment of touch that
compared
they
to
have.
like the many moments of touch between Wei Ling and the general. Yeah, like he grabs her hand at one point and it's like, oh, it's pretty forward of him.
Yeah. This is such a wonderful sequence, the Mid-Autumn Festival sequence, right? So the celebration, again, so now we have nature coming into the domestic compound in a really interesting way, right? With the moon, we have the lanterns lit, everybody from the family and their senior servant is outdoors. They're gathering in a feast together. And of course, it's also a time for poetry, which is the thing that brings Madame Tang and the captain together, right? But as Madame Tang is helping with the preparations, we have a cricket on the table. The captain's hand goes down. Her hand goes on top of his. It's a moment. It's a sort of instinctive moment. It's not necessarily them reaching for each other, but it allows them to find each other. And we have one of our little freeze frames as well. So there's so many different kinds. And then as Wilson noted, it keeps coming back. She keeps recalling it in flashback. And by the end of the film, she recalls it in slow motion in flashback. So it's not a moment, it's a caress, right, between the two of them.
I think now's a good time, because we are talking about the sacrifices this older female character is making, we can sort of make a bridge to the other film that you wanted us to chat a little bit about today and put this in comparison with, and also the film from the director that I chose to write my Global Film Auteurs paper on. Which is Anne Hui's 2011 Andy Lau starrer, A Simple Life, which I was trying to find the connections here, but when we talk about Madame Tung as a character, I feel like Madame Tung and Ato, the maid in A Simple Life, that chooses to live in an old person's home at the beginning of the film and just like eats a lot of bitterness throughout, like biting her tongue, not saying anything about her living condition to her very generous employer, is a very apt comparison piece or companion piece to The Arch. Can I ask how you teach this A Simple Life, or like do you put it in direct comparison with The Arch?
I don't actually. What made me think about it is, Anne Hui is often associated with that first wave of the Hong Kong New Wave, right? And also, as we talked about, a generation coming up through TVB, and in doing so, came up with a different kind of, I would say, aesthetic journey, partially rooted in documentary, right? And so when we think about A Simple Life, there's a much more, I would say, objective approach to realism within the film. When we think about The Arch, we might not necessarily think of realism, but if we think about subjective realism, right, that this is a story about the realistic inner world of a person. So we see realism approached in two different ways by these two different directors. But I also really appreciate the way both of them want to put front and center, going back to the thread that Ben highlighted with contemporary cinema, the stories of older women, and women in particular who are often not provided the opportunity to be the lead characters in feature films. In one case, a widow, supposedly a woman whose life is essentially over, and then a woman who has dedicated her life to service to the point where her family is really an adopted family rather than a biological family. What I find so interesting about Hui's approach is how we have greater recognition, I think, from Andy Lau's character of the sacrifice in a way that changes his own relationship to her, to the woman who has served him his whole life. He also takes on the servant role for her as she ages. That's a different kind of move than we see any character taking within The Arch. And in that, I think, besides the aesthetic difference, it's a wonderful opportunity that Hui takes to highlight how contemporary mores allow, if we're willing to look for them, other ways of generations and genders relate to each other than what we saw within The Arch.
Yeah. Also interesting link that both films' Chinese titles are the names of these female characters.
Exactly.
And their English titles are not. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot about the way that Confucianism still runs through to today in modern times. And something like A Simple Life, yes, you have Andy Lau playing this character that is showing a lot of appreciation for this older person, right? Trying to help her do the eat bitterness, the siku with her, or to alleviate what is happening to her. And yet it is this thing where in The Arch, yes, it is a kind of tragic story for Madame Tung, but it's a tragedy that she wants. And similarly in A Simple Life, she can be more leaning her weight onto the younger man that's taking care of her, but she chooses not to because there is a dignity to eating the bitterness. It is a want. So even though there's the weight of Confucianism bearing on your chest, in a way, there is also this instinct that people want this weight. So it's not just necessarily something where you're saying, oh, Confucianism is bad, but this is just how it works. And sometimes you kind of want this chain that is on you, you want it. And that's something that I think about in normal life and how Asian people think about things. Sometimes we want duty, even though it sucks, And it's very fascinating to kind of unpack that we are kind of still in this in-between point. And Confucianism is still in our blood in a sense. As much as you want to fight it, you still have that in you.
That prompts you to ask a really interesting question, which is, why do you want it, right? And part of that is social conditioning. We see this again and again within the arch, right? In terms of how our family is contextualized within the village itself. In the same way that Madame Tang's recognition is contextualized literally within the nation. This honor that she's being given is being given by the emperor. I mean, it's the greatest honor that a person could have, male or female. So, yeah, why wouldn't you want that a little bit, right? I mean, particularly if it comes with some money that can help you as you age by yourself for the rest of your life. So we're talking about competing desires, right? It's the personal desire, and then it's the communally encouraged desire.
My two favorite condemnations of that desire, whether it is internally or externally driven, and it's both, are this one great cut from when Madame Tang is kneeling and receiving the documentation of the arch, like, you did it, you're getting your arch, you're getting your silver, and then it cuts from her hands accepting it to her hands sewing again. Like, there you are, back to that work that you were told you weren't going to have to do if this came through. And then the second, which we have to dig into, is the arguably emotional climax of the movie, in which Tang is throwing the book of grammar that this movie has developed at you to ramp up things. She's seeing the crickets, she's sewing, she's at the loom, she's in agony, having fierce emotion, and then she goes out into the yard. And you think she's going to perhaps, or at least I thought, she was going to approach old Chang, the servant, with some kind of extension of compassion or intimacy, because it's clear by that point that he's holding a candle for her. And she instead kills the black hen that has been laying eggs all of a sudden. And it's that classic description of a great ending, surprising yet inevitable. Like, I both was caught off guard and in her emotional headspace in that moment. Like, the choice to kill the chicken really shocked me.
And if you knew the folktale or the short story, you would particularly expect a different ending.
Yeah, with old Chang, right?
Yeah, that loom sequence really takes the intercutting to another level, because it's intercutting and it's like the triple superimposition. Like, it's her on the loom itself as like these insert detail shots, and then our cricket scene comes in and scenes of her. Like, there's a lot of looking, and I'm trying to remember like her doing stuff. It's just like everything from the film comes back.
Even like repeats a second of action a few times in a row. She'll like move to the door, move to the door, move to the door.
Yeah, it moves into that moving to the door, and then after that she goes to kill the chicken, which of course gives it like a final punctuation and slows down, and then the servant is like, what are you doing?
It's so tragic that even in that peak of emotion, it's still all futile, that all she can do is slaughter a hen, which, you know, previously it had been hinted was like symbolizing her returning desire or ability to open herself up to love. And she just stifles it, and it goes right to the arch celebration.
Yeah, that's the eating bitterness.
Another moment of like cutting and like scene transition that's really interesting, and it like feeds into what you're saying, Eli, about the arch as this weight. After they receive the letter of the arch, it cuts, if I'm not wrong, to the chiseling. And I don't really know what this is because we never really see what the chiseling is, but I believe it is the building of the arch because of the way that it cuts, right? And then it is a rhythmic cut that then cuts next to whipping people.
Yes.
Right.
Which feels like this metaphor is being connected to say that the arch is a whip that keeps you in place and like forces you to do the thing, right? And I was like, whoa, this is pretty incisive, of like trying to say that that weight of Confucianism is a whip, making you pick choices you don't want.
Yeah. And importantly, whether you're male or female, because that's true in that moment, both for Madame Tang and for the captain.
I love the choice to use J and L cuts where the sound of the building the arch will often precede the visual of it or linger after we cut away from the building of the arch. It's like that sound is infecting the entire rhythm and pulse of the movie into other scenes.
Yeah. And it comes back in that Loom sequence as well, carving, right? It's the one thing in that sequence that does not entrap Madame Tang within visual markers of domesticity, right? We see her behind the loom repeatedly. Even when she goes out to kill the chicken, she's just in the courtyard, right? And the chickens are still associated with food. But that arch carving connects the interiority of the domestic space with this external social pressure, the pressure towards conformity and duty and sacrifice. It's so fascinating because, of course, the killing of the chicken, the killing is associated with like the whipping with the soldiers within the film. So you start the movie with Wei Ling talking about, I could have been a soldier, right? What would that be like? I'd be riding away. And in this moment, we see Madame Tang take that power of life and death into her own hands. But as you said, Eli, strangely turning it inward towards an animal that's been associated with herself in that moment, which is so sad. And then we have old Chang chasing her as she's running away, and we have one of those freeze frames.
That freeze frame is so interesting because it doesn't freeze the whole frame at once.
Yeah.
I was like, whoa. I was watching it again. I was like,
he freezes first,
yeah,
right?
She freezes
first.
on the right of the frame first, and then after that, he freezes on the left of the frame. And I was like, is this movie ending right now? I was like, is this 400 blows?
Right. And then we cut to the arch ceremony. So again, we have a moment that is emotionally huge.
Yeah.
So why do you think she made that move to elide the conversation between Madame Tang and the captain saying, okay, the jig is up. Everybody in the village knows what's been going on with you and my daughter. You got to marry her. And the moment after Madame Tang's breakdown, why not give us those moments?
I think that catharsis allows you to leave your emotional experience within the bounds of a movie. And by refusing that catharsis, it lingers as an unsatisfied feeling that you then leave the movie thinking about. And especially for a movie that wants to be socially pointed and ideally create some kind of social change, I think that denial of catharsis is crucial.
There's like a dissonance in that ending scene after that freeze frame because we're like, oh, we're like charged up now. And it's like, oh, now she's going to just stand there with like no emotion and just like accept the arch. So it's something wrong here. And like she is pretending in this situation. She's doing the duty thing. So I think the freeze frame charges the next scene of like, oh, this isn't like real in the sense of like what we're seeing is not what's happening within her. And I guess that's how it works. I also found that the arch scene was really interesting because there's like this big black tree trunk right in the middle of her head. And I was like, is this like a noose imagery? Like
that thought crossed my mind too.
Yeah, I wasn't sure, but it felt very pointed to have this big black line right behind her head. Almost, I guess, tethering her to the arch above her. Right? I don't know. I was like, feels too in my face to not be a thing.
And then we see old Chang leave in the background. So we know she is all alone in that family compound now. She has nothing but the cold stone of that arch.
Maybe this is the wrong takeaway, but I did think that is a nice arch.
It was worth it.
Well, but I think, Eli, that goes back to the adulation of the villagers, right?
Yeah.
We have cutaways to multiple members of the villagers and their looks of adoration and respect, right?
Which harkens back to the very start when we enter the village by seeing close-ups on those villagers' faces and what they're doing day to day.
Exactly. We have a really cyclical structure here. You know, we start and end with the mountains and the landscape outside of the village, but we also start and end the central section of the film with the three women around the family dinner table, right? Before and after the marriage of the daughter. The hairstyle and the dress of the daughter, of course, is changed after the wedding before she departs. So we have a kind of cycle happening here. But I think that Eli's point regarding that which lingers, what we haven't seen, what we're still processing, the kind of dissonance between the respect that Madame Tang is given at the end of the film and the ache that we know is inside of her, that is the power of melodrama in a nutshell, right? That's what enables the social critique that melodramas work so hard to build. Even when you have a happy ending, it's not a happy ending, right? We're still thinking about how things could be different. What if something else had happened? What if there were other choices or other opportunities available for our characters? And here, particularly, I think Tang is thinking not just about the mother, but potentially also about the daughter as well. The daughter is off on her great adventure, but she's starting another cycle anew. She's beginning the life that her mother had.
And the words that we're left on, like that quote at the end, and time moves on, anguish and torment remain momentous only because we feel the pain. I feel like it is like an advertisement to like eat bitterness. It's like, wow, like it's worth it. It's worth it to go through this. It's worth it.
Maybe it's meant to be ironic. I don't know.
So that was my question. Do you think that Tang is offering a critique or no?
I feel like the answer has to be yes, based on like everything that we've talked about. Like the overt nature of all the formal choices is that she must be critiquing it. And honestly giving it very little leeway or leniency in her critique. And like my response to a lot of like Confucian suggestions in life is like, no, fuck that. like usually that's what I say. Like, no, don't do it. Yeah, like it doesn't seem worth it. It never seems worth it, right? You can't eat adulation.
And yet, in the same way that, you know, there's the old adage about you can't make a war movie without glorifying war, this is a beautiful art object, this movie, as a monument to her suffering. I don't believe that more than I believe your take, Ben, but I'm maybe just putting on a devil's advocate hat.
Like, I guess, like, the question is, would you come away from this movie being like, wow, Madame Tang, she really, such an amazing person. She really chose the hard choices. And, like, I respect her and I wish I could be like her. It's like, do you think that could be the takeaway?
But you know, so many people in that kind of situation might view this film in this way, right? Like a lot of women probably watching this movie in Hong Kong when it was coming out was probably like, oh, wow, like all these sacrifices she's making just so her daughter can have like a nice life and she can like maintain how the family operates. I feel like so many people around me are doing different forms of doing things that they don't want to do in order to like keep their family running. It's like the bitter truth.
Except while that is her fate, the film expresses her struggle.
Yeah.
So while at the end we are left with the status quo affirmed, through the entirety of the film, we see how the film's formal choices give voice to her desire for something different. And that alone is powerful, right? Even if you're coming to the movie having made the same choices as Madame Tang, there might be something in the expression of Madame Tang's struggle that you can relate to and that strikes something emotionally resonant for you.
I mean, quite a classic kind of melodramatic plot structure is to essentially do this, right? Like to sell the tragedy, which is like, look at all the struggle, but we affirm status quo, which is why some of the very different melodramas give you an ending in which the hero chooses to do the thing that feels unexpected, but usually throwing away social conformity and social acceptance. Like the one that comes to my mind right away is like All That Heaven Allows, right? Which ends with like the older woman going together with Rock Hudson, right? The choice that you don't think she will make, but she does make, but to the detriment of her social standing. And so I think especially as modern viewers, we tend to want that ending. It's like, yeah, throw away the tradition. Like, go with what you love. And of course, in that time and even before that, like the sense of like accepting your lot and to do your duty is also revered in itself. I think a lot about Ozu films as well, which are also melodramatic and about people sacrificing, but then everyone's sacrificing, so no one's happy. But it's like, wow, look at how great we all are to each other, but we're not happy.
Right. In the 1600s, for Madame Tang to run away with the captain, abandon her daughter, her mother-in-law, the respect of the village, the arch coming from the emperor, that would be highly unlikely. Yeah. Right? Yeah. And the captain probably would have to leave his unit. They'd be in exile together. Yeah, those are very, very rare stories.
I want to talk about my favorite shot.
Oh, yes.
Which is in the temple. And there's an overhead-ish tilt down on her, but there's like 3 of her.
Yes, it's the only time in the whole film we see that particular choice, where she is divided and multiplied. Her internal emotional split.
And right? it is the moment of choosing, right? This is the moment where she's literally praying for answers to her ancestors to tell her what choice to make about herself. And of course, if you're asking your ancestors, they're going to tell you to follow tradition. Right. And it's like, so it is very interesting, like that. And then there's that jump cut where she's going and praying multiple times in that sequence. Yes. I was like, whoa, like she's really like thinking about this.
The overlapping editing that takes you back to Eisenstein.
And leads you back right away into that wedding sequence where it's like, oh, she makes a choice. You don't see her do the choice, you see the consequence of the choice.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's a great shot because it was very like modern, even for that time, I would say. Like, it's not jump cut, it's like this diffracted face.
Yeah. It's, you brought up Cirque before, and think of how Cirque uses mirrors, right? It's a different version of that, a functional equivalent, suggesting the multiplicity of self.
It reminds me, I've been seeing this choice a lot in TV, I think. I saw it in My Brilliant Friend, where it was like the use of a glass door, but the door is like, those vertical slats? So when you look at somebody in there, they look like they're being sliced up. It kind of reminded me of that. I saw that in My Brilliant Friend, and I saw it in The Captive, Ackerman, where it's like you can't see the person, or like they're slightly unknowable in that sense, is that kind of feeling.
The Loom does a similar effect as well, right?
I was just going to say the same thing at the very end.
Because it divides up her face.
Exactly, yeah. And it's quite interesting how Wei Ling is also often presented in liminal spaces. She looking out windows, standing in doorways, her glance looking outward. She's not divided the way that you're describing at all. She's very unified, but it really gives us a sense from the very beginning of an outward-looking desire on her part, and helps to motivate then the opportunity she takes advantage of when the captain arrives.
Lisa, that's reminding me of the moment in the Moon Festival when Madame Tang excuses herself from the table so that the monk, Old Chang, Yang, and Wei Ling can continue playing their poetry drinking game. Mm-hmm. And we watch Madame Tang walk away from the table from inside a window. And it really, it kind of threw me. I was like, why are we here to view this moment? And then I think the next shot is Madame Tang lying on her side, listening with the window behind her. It's like, it's anticipating her rough optical POV before she even enters that space, and anticipating her listening to her daughter flirting with Captain Yang. Such a many-layered moment and a weird adoption of Madame Tang's looking out that Wei Ling typically occupies.
And we also have an aperture for Madame Tang with the diaphanous fabric coming from the ceiling, probably some sort of netting that protects her as she sleeps. And her face is in the middle of that slit there. Very evocative moment, yes. Was anyone at any point rooting for Wei Ling?
When she's on horseback on the river with him.
No.
Because in many ways, she has a more modern sensibility, right?
Yeah.
She's the one who's like, this is what I want. I'm going to go for it. I'm going to say it out loud. She's more action-oriented, more tactile, as we've talked about. So in many ways, you might expect her character would resonate more with contemporary audiences.
I just feel like I'm so fully in Madame Tong's subjectivity that I can't be like wrestled out of it, even for those moments that we get between the captain and Wei Ling. I feel like I'm always still thinking about Madame Tong in those moments, even just because we are so rooted in Madame Tong. Yeah, that's what Tang wants us to.
I'm not going to lie and say, I think I found Madame Tong more attractive than Wei Ling.
From as a character?
No, just no.
Or physically?
Physically,
Or
more
like
attractive from a look perspective. And I can't really explain why.
Well,
Wow,
Lisa
Ben.
Liu is stunning.
Yeah, maybe this is the point where we talk about Lisa Liu. We have a plug.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, we do have a plug. The documentary Lisa Liu Plays Herself, directed by Chen Meijun, is premiering today.
Oh my gosh.
Today, Hong Kong time.
The day we're recording, not when you're listening to this.
Yeah. July 12th, 2025 at the New York Asian Film Festival. So you just keep an eye out. It's probably coming out on VOD or home video soon. It tells the story of the now 98-year-old Chinese-American icon in her own words and through archival footage. So that will be one documentary to watch if you liked Lisa Liu's performance in this film.
Yeah, how did Lisa Liu come to occupy the starring role?
In the promotion of the film, so Hilda Cho Xuan, who played Wei Ling, was very much a part of the promotional campaign as a sort of young, hip, late 60s, cosmopolitan, feminine presence, right, is essentially how they were selling her within the film. But the first one to be cast was Roy Chow, who played the captain. And I think Lisa Liu, she may have had something like a contact with the executive producer who provided the funding from the US.
I see. Did this have a big release in Hong Kong? Like, how was it received in Hong Kong?
So it has a fascinating story. Tong herself became a bit of a sensation and almost a cult-like figure amongst young writers at one of the publications that was very popular amongst sort of hip intellectual young people at the time. And there were many, many, many stories about her over a short period of time. But it was very difficult to get distribution for the film because, again, it was black and white. And the association of black and white at that point in time was with low-quality films in Hong Kong. So it got a very short release within Hong Kong and did not play extensively there. And it played then after the international festival play. So did not have a strong box office presence when it was originally released. It was the Chinese Student Weekly ran 60 articles, either directly or indirectly touching upon topics related to the film within 18 months.
Wow.
So a lot of attention paid to it then. It wasn't released in Hong Kong until 1970, when it was given a 3-day slot at 4 cinemas. And Tong actually had to tint the original film with color in order to secure the release.
Whoa.
Hand tinting the black and white into color. But the film didn't fare very well at the box office, and so it didn't get any further release initially from that.
And I'm just wondering, like, how many of, like, the new wave director, or, like, how many of her contemporaries or future directors coming up would have seen this and, like, had that affect their work coming up?
So both William Chung and Wong Kar-wai have spoken about The Arch as a picture of influence for them as they were developing their work. So, a slightly younger than Tong, coming up in, around the 80s into the 90s, contemporaries slightly after the first wave of Hong Kong New Wave directors. One other thing I wanted to share that takes us back to the significance of the story and the centering on Madame Tang's subjectivity. There's a quote that Tang gave that I thought was quite fascinating because it gets back to the challenge of trying to tell this particular story at this particular point in time, regardless of what industrial systems you were working in. She said, quote, "When I finished writing the script, I gave it to my professor at USC to read. And he said that it was not a filmable script because it was about the interior feelings of a woman who had no outlet to express them. Oof. And that the plot had too few characters. But," she said, "that is exactly why I thought it was good material for the cinema." She said, USC at that time was so different, and this film is not Hollywood at all. I needed to use cinematic effects to get inside her head using a more European approach, end quote. And she storyboarded the film before she got started. So she was really thinking right from the get-go, from the script stage before she got into production, of the distinct strategies that she wanted to use and where she was going to be drawing them from to tell the story, as we talked about, that's really rooted in the interiority of a woman who's not free to speak about her desires.
I feel like my takeaway from that quote, which is like, I've heard that kind of response from professors at more trade-oriented film schools. And I've heard many stories of people hearing such responses and then being like, I guess I got to go do this myself because the establishment thinks my script sucks.
Yes.
And it is interesting because the narrative of the making of the film is that Tang going to America, learning how to do things with a more American sensibility, making something that is different from what was happening in Hong Kong at the time. But then this kind of rounds counter to that narrative in a sense, where it's like, at one point we're saying that, oh, she learned stuff from America, but at one point we're also seeing the resistance from that American context to the stories that she's telling. And I find it very interesting because I was reading your notes and at the very end, there's like this little write-up for that premiere at the San Francisco International Film Festival.
Yeah.
Fascinating write-up when you think about the way that it frames Tang Shu-shuen's story as a filmmaker. I'm just going to read the first paragraph. It says, films from China have not been widely seen by American audiences, usually because the popular cinema of that country, parentheses, as in India, is made for commercial purposes, catering to an unsophisticated taste for fantasy and escapism in entertainment. But in a sense, kind of painting her as somebody outside of the system of her country and like learning these things outside of that foreign country to make it more sophisticated for a Western taste, which of course is painting this narrative of, I guess, American exceptionalism in terms of the craft of filmmaking and them being able to teach them that. And I found that to be interesting, which is why I like this quote from Tang, which kind of counteracts this force of trying to say that, oh, there is a right way to do things, or that people in these institutions know what is the right way to do things or can teach you the right way to do things. Even this film festival as an institution is trying to paint this picture. I think that's just kind of fascinating. And I think you still see stuff like that today in the way that we approach cinema, in the way that huge institutions get a say as to what is correct cinema, or like the right kind of cinema, or the cinema that we want to celebrate. But of course, you do need these institutions to make things happen as well, because they have the connections and they have the money. So I always find this kind of thing to be very fascinating.
Yeah, I think part of what we see going on in that quote that you read is how festivals try to present themselves as the temples of art, right?
Yeah.
In contrast to commercialism. So popular cinema is not art. Popular cinema is not what we show at a film festival. So Tang not working within that form does fit in the film festival, right? The Arch. But if the Arch had an American story and was made by an American director using the same style, it would be equally out of place. in Hollywood of 1968, 1969, 1970, right? There were very few films that were coming out of Hollywood at that time. Not none, but very few that were as overtly expressive in their use of visual style and score as this particular film. So it would be a unique film no matter where it was coming out of. But you also highlight, I think, a challenge that Tang faced, which was whether the film was being shown in the US, in Europe, in Hong Kong, her identity
is fractured.
Yeah, and led to suppositions on the part of critics regarding what the film should be, right? So when Vincent Canby reviewed the film, at that time, one of New York Times' major reviewers, he faulted the film for a lack of modesty. He was talking about aesthetic modesty, but there's no way you can make me believe that he would use that same word for a male director, whether the director was Chinese or not, but particularly because the director was both female and Chinese. That was a really loaded expectation on his part.
Because we talk a lot about this, especially when we talk about film festivals, because we covered some film festivals and we talk about transnational cinema. And I always kind of lament this feeling that local filmmakers in Southeast Asia creating stories to cater to an European audience. And I can't say necessarily that is true, but it's always like their films play in those festivals, but when they come back to that home country, nobody's watching it. And so there's that. And then there's also the fact that Tang is, I assume, American Chinese at this point, or no, but they kind of paint it as she's just Chinese, but they paint it as a Chinese American film. And I think the Asian American directors have this problem now where when they try and export their American films made by Asians about Asians to Asian territories, that they don't get received as well in Asian territories because the Asians don't see the Asian Americans as Asian enough. And so they're like, there's something wrong here. So it's a very interesting kind of point that we're at where like this globalization of people like really makes this reception of films, it's not just about the film anymore. It's also about culture and like where you sit in relation to the culture that the film is presenting to you. And then that also, the identity of the filmmaker also kind of becomes important as to how you perceive it. And as you mentioned, Lisa, the gender of them also can also be like, oh, is this what a woman would do? Is it what a man would do? Is this right for a woman, quote unquote, or is it right for a man to do this? And it really puts all these things in relief of like how we approach and think about cinema. It's not so simple as, oh, do you think the film is good? Because you come to every film with tons of baggage thinking about it. Like obviously we've raised the Confucianism that like I think me and Wilson have more like direct experience understanding from an Asian context as people, whether working within it or working in opposition to it.
Yeah. And Tang was very aware of this at the time. In all of that coverage in the Chinese Student Weekly, one scholar has noted how you see, and anytime you see an image of her, a photograph of her, she's either wearing sunglasses or she's facing away from the camera. And in 1970, she gave one of the critics for the paper, writers for the paper, an interview in which she pushed back against the desire to ask her biographical questions. And she said, these details about my life don't matter. They're coincidental, where I was born, where I was raised. What you should be asking about are my ideas and my theories and my opinions. So that was quite interesting. That suggested to me that she was very much aware that in some way her identity markers could be used to trap her within defined sets of expectations. And like Madame Tang, she wanted to break those barriers, right? And not be defined in that way, and instead let her work stand on its own. Is there anything that we didn't cover that people wanted to cover? I feel like we did a pretty good job of moving through the film.
The episode's longer than
quite
the film.
thorough. Yeah.
That's true. It's longer than the film.
That's really funny. I'm a little curious about her career post The Arch. I was wondering if you saw any of those films and what you thought of them.
I have not seen any of the other three. It's the next film that she did, China Behind, that has the most acclaim. The two following that, I think one or both are comedies. And then she moved to the US and retired and became a restaurateur. So,
oh, cool.
Yeah. So this is, I think, the one that's in widest circulation right now. Yeah. I'd love to see China Behind.
Yeah, me too. It's very cool that this movie is being like brought to the forefront again. And like, it was just so awesome seeing her in person. And like that whole time that she and Tilda Swinton were having that talk, she was just basically just gushing over being able to speak to Tilda. But like Swinton had seen this movie like so long ago and like it was very familiar with it. So it was also like fascinating to hear her take on the film. Yeah, another deep cut. I don't know, icon, Tilda Swinton.
Yeah.
Yes, it's funny. I saw her last fall with the Almodovar film.
Oh, yeah. Room Next Door.
In New York. Yeah. So here we go. The follow-up, 1974, China Behind, is about 4 mainland Chinese college students who escaped to Hong Kong at the start of the Cultural Revolution in 1966. The picture was banned for 13 years by a wide variety of governments, the British colonial authorities in Hong Kong, as well as the government in Taiwan and mainland China. Both China Behind and The Arch are consistently listed among various lists of the 100 best Chinese films. And then her last two pictures was a comedy, Sup Sop Bop Dup, from 1975 and a social satire from 1979 called The Hong Kong Tycoon. This is important also. Tang started Hong Kong's first serious film journal, Close Up. It only lasted for a couple of years, but it was one of the main breeding grounds for the Hong Kong New Wave. So her legacy lasts not just in terms of her films, but also her contribution to film culture and criticism in Hong Kong.
That's awesome. Thank you so much to Professor Lisa Dombrowski for being on the podcast today and offering so much information and insight on The Arch. If you haven't seen the film yet, you can head to the M Plus Cinema if you're in Hong Kong in October to catch it. I'm sure it will be traveling around different festivals around the world and will hopefully soon get like a home video or a streaming release. And right now you could actually catch it on YouTube. It is streaming on YouTube.
Interesting. It's also on Canopy in the US. Les Blanc sells DVDs of the older version of the film, not the restored version. So let's hope that M Plus makes the restored version widely available either on streaming or on Blu-ray.
Yes. And I hope this is the start of you coming on the podcast to talk about more Hong Kong cinema or East Asian cinema. You're like walking into this trap right now.
This is the arch that we are tying you to.
The weight. Yeah. But completely up to you. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the offer. It has been delightful seeing you all.
Likewise.
And, you know, I have a number of vivid memories of the three of you in class together and the way that your contributions to discussion elevated our conversations about the films that we were exploring. And this is another example of that. And I'm so happy that you have continued to do that through this podcast and are getting out so widely. It's really exciting.
Lisa, it's not an exaggeration to say that that is entirely from your teaching and the reason this podcast exists.
Oh, you all bring a lot of yourselves to this. I can't take credit.
Can you give us a grade for this podcast?
Oh my God.
This is just the first draft. I have to hear the final.
No.
Yeah, the final presentation, right?
This is feeling like a C+, guys.
Needs work.
Where's the script breakdown? Where's the scene analysis?
The segmentation.
Yeah.
I think you did a nice job bringing in specific examples. Highlights. I can't believe you're being quiet and listening to me right now.
Yes, I want to listen to this. I like validation.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, no, you have nothing to worry about.
Thank you for listening to Deep Cut. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts to help others discover the show. A great way to support us is to leave a review for our show or comment on our episodes directly on Spotify. You can keep up with us on Instagram, Letterboxd, and X at Deep Cut Pod, or follow our TikTok at DeepCutPod_film. If you want to chat with us and other fans of the show, come join our Discord server where we talk about movies, TV, music, and share what we're up to. We also have a Patreon. If you want to support us with a monthly subscription, we deeply appreciate it. Click the link in our description or go to deepcutpod.com to find links to everything we've mentioned here. A special thanks to our Patreon Deep Cut Pick level supporter, Leah Lai. We can't do the show without you. Deep Cut is hosted and produced by us, Wilson Lai, Benjamin Yap, and Eli Sands. Our cover art is designed by Justina Yam, and our theme song is composed by the one and only Eli Sands. I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli.
Hi, I'm Lisa.
Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about movies with you next time. Okay.
I should have said bye, I'm Lisa.
It's okay.
Well, now you have.